Okay, here we're going to see how we stitch a ball and how we do particularly close a ball and get the last stitches into the ball, and where do they disappear to, because you cannot see them from the outside. It can take over 3 hours to stitch a professional ball, and experienced stitcher is required to do the ball from start to finish completely himself, and that ensures that the ball is perfect in every way, perfect shape, perfect size, and all the stitches are exactly the same tension. Stitcher uses for some very basic equipment, it's standard within the industry, a set of clamps to hold the ball, some wax for the thread, and awl to open up the stitching holes as he stitches the thread, and another awl with an opening at the end to pull the threads through to the back of the ball for the last stitch, which we'll see in a minute. The first stage in stitching a ball is to take 2 flat panels, put them face together and stitch straight across through the back of the panels. Most of the panels can be done initially in this way, and you're making pairs or sets of 3. It is relatively straightforward at this stage, making a set of panels. When those panels are made into sets, we then start making them into a complete ball, at which point the ball is turned then the right way round, and any further stitches have to be stitched in from the outside to the inside of the ball. Particularly difficult is the last seam of the ball, which can take up to 15 minutes itself, because that is stitched from the outside. And here we can see him there stitching the short panel, and he will tie that off at the end with a knot. This stitcher here is closing the last seam, starting to close the last seam of the ball. This can take up to 15 minutes just to do one seam, and is the most skilled part of the operation. He's working from the outside of the ball at this stage and putting all the stitches on the inside, so he's turning all the panels over. The threads are coated with special wax, and as he pulls and the threads crack. Speed of the stitch and speed of pulling the stitches tight causes that crack and actually melts the wax and sets the stitch in the seam, so it's held solid. Each time he makes a few stitches, he has to move the open part of the seam towards him, so you can actually access that. And that takes a considerable amount of time and strength. You can see him here turning it. He opens up the pre-stitched holes in the ball with an awl, puts the needles through from both sides, and then pulls it tight. And he does that on a full ball over 1800 times. 1800 stitches in a ball. Now the stitcher has now got to the stage where he is stitching the last 4 stitches on the ball. And each of these stitches has to be stitched from each thread, from each side of the panel. In fact, it takes about 32 stitches to do that, 32 movements to actually close those 4 stitches, and to close them evenly. So you'll pull the last stitch tight. You will then take an awl and he will pull through from the back of the ball, from the inside. He will pull the stitches right through to the back of the ball. He will then tie a knot on the back of the ball in the stitches and cut off the stitches and pull the stitches, the knot, back inside the ball to disappear, so you will see no evidence of where the last stitch was or how the ball was closed. It's like magic. He's knotting the stitch, then cut that off and make it disappear inside the ball. And there we have the finished ball, and a satisfied stitcher.